I was wrong about my perspective on how to develop the world and who should choose how we go about doing this. And so I want to talk to you all about this idea of perspective. And when you think about it, this is a really, really daunting word. You've got 7 billion different perspectives on everyday life alone. You've got all sorts of others on subjects from food to art and to politics. And I want to talk to you all today about that power of the perspective and how gaining understanding of the perspectives of others has the power to change everything, from just your mind to the entire world as we know it. So I came to Thinking Beyond Borders with this really, really simplistic idea of development. Well, I mean, it wasn't super simplistic, but just give me a minute to figure it out. So as a devout believer in these, the Millennium Development Goals, and I'll give you all a minute to read them. They're not really super hard. I mean, they're just the 8 goals that were adopted by all 193 UN member states and 23 organizations in 2000. And these are designed to eradicate extreme poverty by 2015. And some of us in this room know how well that's going, which is not the greatest. And they all have very specific numbers to achieve, and they give this blueprint to qualify if a nation is progressing out of poverty or not. And I thought this was a really great idea. All right. I thought it because it was simple. It's hopeful. You can't get easier than this. And, it's just so simple. You follow these 8 bullet points and you're coming out of poverty. But I also championed the power of small communities and what kind of power they possess to make change. And I learned a lot about many different approaches of community-based projects, especially the ones where the communities are taking most of the ownership, and so then they are much more likely to take care of these projects as they go along. So I connected these 2 ideas together. You are having outsiders coming into communities, you have them see what they thought could help a community advance, and then you aid them to implement those ideas. And then you have the community doing lots of the moving and the shaking to make it happen, so that they continue to work on it as it moves on. And I assumed that these projects, with the communities, would ask for projects based on these right here, Millennium Development Goals. Because it only made sense to me that people would choose, okay, cover the things that are basic for everything else. So, with the right amount of money and time, poverty would be banished all over the world, and everything would be saved. And I imagine myself, as that outsider, going to the communities and spending time in them to aid them in their progress forward. And it sounded like the greatest thing in the world to me. I wanted to be that guy, making the changes for people around the world. And then, moving up to management positions and overseeing everything once I, had enough time in the field. And I was really, really ready to dedicate my life to others in such a direct way. But then I started going to these communities, and I was imagining this happening in, and I began to run across all sorts of perspectives that changed how living out this dream that I had, this fantasy of a wild, exotic life traveling across the world as a day job, was going to play out in the real world, if it actually could. So, my assumptions for how things work in the developing world started changing right off the bat in Ecuador, in the Satchel village of El Coste. So while we were there, we were planting native trees that mark property lines for our host families. And this is my house. Not the replaced line part, but as you can see, it's pretty rough. Our water came from a well that wasn't very clean. And most of the food was starting to spoil by the time it went to the fridge, because my family insisted on unplugging the refrigerator. And at the nearest police station hospital are miles up a gravel, bumpy road. And so I thought, why am I planting a bunch of trees for boundary lines before these basic necessities are covered? And then I was living there for a while, and I saw that they were doing really well. They're doing better than me at home in lots of areas without the things I would consider basic for human existence. And I was doing pretty well too, except for weight loss. I know, it's pretty scary. Oh God. I'm going to move on, so you guys don't have to look at that. And I saw that these people were really, really happy without things that I would consider necessities. Yeah, there was problems with water, among other things, but these older folks in the community were still really, really hardy, working their everyday lives to ages we would expect for complete retirement. And they were really happy people. They found enjoyment in very small things, from volleyball to soccer. There's food to eat, a place to sleep, and a farm to tend to. And that was life. And I soon found out that this issue of the boundary lines was really pressing. Because the mestizos are this group of, they're not completely indigenous people, but they're more connected to westernized Ecuador. And so they've been starting to come into El Poste over the time. These have been encroaching on the Sachulas. And it's really easy for them to encroach because the Sachulas are passive people and they don't really like to fight. And may I add also that the Sachulas, this is not their native land. They've been forced onto this. They've been deeded this land, basically reservation style, once the Ecuadorian government had started coming in and kind of clearing out the rainforest for oil extraction. And this was a really important revelation for me. So I saw the weight of the perspectives of the community. And that was my X factor. I'm going to refer back to this a lot. So what I mean by X factor is it's something that gave me a clear understanding of an issue that I was facing. And I believe that there's these in any development project, whether you're talking about countrywide to just like a small classroom. And there are things that you just wouldn't think about and you wouldn't be able to see until they're right in your face. There are moments, details, idiosyncrasies that make you get it. And everything kind of becomes clear when they come into play. So I now saw that not all priorities were the same for development from place to place. For my logic, it would make a lot of sense to me to clean up the water or fix the road situation first. But to the Sachulas, nothing could be more important or logical than protecting their land. And it made more sense to me as time went on. The more I listened to community leaders like Don Jose, and maybe just bask in his badassness for 1 second, and my family about their struggles against the mestizos. We listened to the calls from the community for what they thought should change. And we did it despite it being against our logical train of thought. And that's when my ideas really started to first change. This work wasn't going to be logical. There was going to be things that did not make sense to me. And that had to be okay. Because I was helping the people in the community create institutions and systems that they thought would help them. And I was really no place as this outsider with a high school education, having read some books, to them they were wrong and illogical to do the projects that they thought were going to help them the most. And so here I am, wrong. Wrong that logic is going to be the same everywhere. Whoops. Wrong that the Millennium Development Goals were the path to ensuring later success of the community and culture. Wrong that development can be simplified to only 8 bullet points. And wrong that needs are seen through the same lens, and that they're the same everywhere, and that I knew what was best and what was right. And this was a blow to me, because I don't like to be wrong. It was something I really could not get right away. And I struggled for a really long time, because I was stuck in this small development paradigm that held on to a very strict system of goals and grants to fulfill. And I could no longer say that my logic was the end-all, be-all for the world. I was really, really wrong. And it scared me in a way, because I thought, if I really don't know what I'm doing, aren't I just making everything worse? So I really clung to this idea that people from the outside can still come in because, as you heard, I wanted this wild, exotic life of traveling the world. But I knew that this work was going to be so much harder. Because to me, it was just so much easier to just, okay, put in the basic resources first before everything else. And now this work holds all sorts of other areas and ideas. And the solutions were no longer clearly printed for me. They were cloudy, and they needed to be searched for. And then India came around, and it brought something a little bit different for me. And it wasn't going to be the first time that I was wrong about my ideas on development. That happened many, many times before. But my fantasy of this exotic traveling life started to melt away. So this is Nisha. Nisha is my 6th grade student that I worked with for a few weeks in a charity school just outside the very spidery sprawls of an ever-expanding Jaipur. So there were 7 of us. We had 25 students, which great student-teacher ratio, right? But we only had 3 rooms. And we didn't have very many materials for the school to work with. In fact, one of our English books was in Spanish. That was pretty difficult to use. Anisha was very behind on her English when we first started. And I was expecting that, coming from this very poorly funded charity school where students often pay only 100 to 200 rupees a year. And for those of you who don't know, that's 2 to 4 but when we were working together, she was learning so fast, and she was getting a lot out of our limited time together. I couldn't understand why she hadn't been progressing as fast before, but I started working with her. Okay, so maybe her home life was really chaotic. Maybe it was because there was only a few teachers and volunteers like me just rotating in and out of her life all too often. And those harsh realities were just out of sight, out of mind. So I tried to focus as much as I could and to try to teach her as much as possible in that little time I had. And then 2 weeks to my time in the school, a new student, Keisha, shows up. And that's this little guy right here. And that little guy is the X Factor. And as soon as he starts taking classes from me, he begins to dominate. He answers every single question. He's just kind of standing there, sheepish. Can't really get a word in. And it was suddenly so much harder for me to teach Nisha in a way that I knew that she was going to learn. To me, it should have been everything else. It should have been bad teachers, or maybe a family that didn't want her to go to school, and a poor education, and everything else that you wouldn't find in a 2-hour school day. And this little tidbit changed everything for me. I could sit in a room for hours. I could poke at the Indian education system as the problem. But it took me until I got into that room to really see things from the perspective of the student and the teacher. I could have said, coming from a very good public education, and from learning in seminar about how to educate in a liberating way, that Indian teachers, that these are the right and wrong methods, and that, you should just follow these steps to correct the school system and, tweak a few maybe for cultural sensitivity, and there you go. That's how you're going to make your students learn. But suddenly development became much more than being sensitive. It was about empathizing. It was about listening to, seeing, experiencing those that I was devoting my time to helping. It was no longer about some children that I heard about who couldn't go to a good school. It was Nisha and Keisha together in that classroom. It was about putting in the time in the places that I was supposed to help. I couldn't just spend a few weeks in a place and move on and say that I understood and could fix the issues. Sorry. I had to spend a long time in a place in order to get to know people and the problems in a project. I was grateful for that longer time I had in the school. If I had left only a few days earlier, I wouldn't have known anything about Keisha or why Nisha did so poorly. I had to get down off my high horse because, again, I was wrong. I was wrong that I could come into a place and say I knew how to fix it by reading about it. I had to go and see those problems and to try to gain the most understanding I could about them. So gone were my days of traveling all across the world from place to place, saying that I knew what to do in each place, and I understood their struggles from just a few weeks of visiting. So this extravagant dream that I had was suddenly destined for a much more humble experience. It all started to culminate in South Africa, where I finally solidified this new way of thinking and looking at the problems that we talk about in classes and meeting rooms all around the world. I found that my time in South Africa was extremely rewarding, because at this point I was very, very comfortable with the idea of locals going ahead and taking ownership of projects to help alleviate issues of poverty or other social detriment in their communities. So when I got there, I found founded, staffed by local people who were trying to alleviate the numerous public health issues that are so prevalent in South Africa. And it really looked like a development project that right now I believed in and championed. So yes, I might be wrong about this too. But this method of bringing funding from the government and other donors, and then all the work being managed and staffed by people in and around the townships, those problems was, and still really is powerful to me. And I felt like I was figuring out my new role now. Observing and immersing myself in an area was bringing me great perspective and opening me to new ideas. But in South Africa, there were still many cultural aspects that I could not understand despite spending weeks and weeks there. It was only when I first started asking my caregiver questions, shout out to my caregiver, that I started to understand these issues. And this is the other X factor, the powers of question in a conversation. I learned all about what South Africans thought was normal about topics like fidelity, which, by the way, a lot of them don't think it's very normal. It's almost expected for men to be sleeping around and having affairs. I also found out that many colored people, let me explain myself before anybody gets offended. Colored people is a term that's used to know people of mixed race and mixed heritage. It's in South Africa, when you apply for something, it's white, colored, black, Indian, other. That's what their applications look like. And they were not actually all that upset at the apartheid system back in the day, but many of them championed it for the control and the security that it provided. I wouldn't have had any idea about that without asking. I'd probably still be at a loss for why AIDS was so bad in South Africa and why exactly it got that way. And I really started believing in the power of conversation at this point, and how I could see someone's perspective, just the simple act of talking. I talked to people, rich, poor, black, white, colored, people who moved here, to people who had lived in one township and one house their entire life. And I was entranced by all the sides of the story of South Africa, and all the opinions, all the ideas, and all the possible solutions. And it was crazy to me that people thought all these new ideas about the new government, the apartheid, and what the next step should be for the nation. It seemed so simple to me, coming from the background that I come from. The ending of apartheid had to be a good thing for this nation, and that the democracy will bring so many good things. But lots of folks, from many walks of life, may I add, thought totally different than I did. They thought different on so many different topics. And that helped me gain a better understanding of the nation. And this transition is really tough for a lot of people. There's a lot of politicking that goes on to get votes, and that often goes in the back to taxpayers, and over 5% of South Africans actually pay taxes. So you get the idea of what's going on there. And it's complicated. It's very complicated. You wouldn't possibly be able to figure this out just with watching. You have to ask people all sorts of questions. And that's when everything changed for me again. I discovered that to get to the truth, to gain understanding, when the area around you doesn't show you all its truths, you have to go looking for them. And it's something that again, changed my role in development. I felt like that now I could be the one who could come in without the same lenses as the other stakeholders. And I could try to be someone who could collect a fuller picture. It wouldn't be me saying I know better, but that together, all the people in the community, in an area, hold the keys to their truth, and to the success of themselves and those around them. And it can't be one single thinker, leader, group, or idea that holds the monopoly on the truth. It's everyone, together. And it's all those ideas together, being discussed, questioned, and changed. And that's what I think development should really be about today. It should be all about bringing people together, collaborating, discussing, and looking at the problems from all sorts of perspectives. It's about looking very deep into those problems and finding those X factors, those things that make everything difficult, and calling on the people that know them best to try to make those solutions. The world that we live in today is increasingly connected in so many ways. I really don't understand why people aren't connecting more than ever. And to me, it isn't asking, why haven't we put enough money into this? But why haven't we started talking to more people and asking more questions? With all this time making connections across all sorts of language and culture barriers, I find it really hard to believe that people can still try to use a rubric to plan development projects, and that there are still poverty reduction plans that are designed to rebuild a nation on a formula. I have seen how great work can be done when people are simply connected together, and they talk, discuss, ask questions. And somehow this concept is just up and coming in development theory. And I propose that outsiders and anyone attempting to start any development project first start by just asking the people that they want to help and get them together and discuss all the issues that they're facing. Get all the perspectives. Get everything out in the open so that there are fewer surprises and hiccups when it all starts. And I wholeheartedly believe that this would give an organization a better idea of how to approach the issues and how to solve the problems that they are facing. And I think that's where I fit into this picture now. I want to be that person that starts the conversations and gets those perspectives and tries to bring them all together with other folks in the community, create new systems for adults that will really change their lives for the better. And I really think that's the power of perspective. I've had some new ones, and I've learned about the others that are in the communities that I've lived in. They really have changed me. And I think they've changed things inside me for the better. I've seen how having a new look at something or a different idea can change lives in one area. But now I want this to be brought to the bigger picture. Because I know it can. And I know that it really does have the power to change the world.